Hey everyone, welcome back to the Why Not RV podcast. This is a show where we're going to dig into all things RV life, from getting off the grid to sharing our RV adventures together. I'm Chris, and today we're going to be tackling a topic that confuses a lot of people when they first get into RVing: electricity. So specifically, what's the difference between AC and DC power, and how do they work together in your RV? Now, whether you're boondocking in the desert or plugged into a campground, understanding your RV's electrical system can save you a ton of headaches and maybe even prevent a fried fuse or a dead battery. So what is AC and what is DC power? So let's talk about it. Let's start with the basics. AC stands for alternating current, and DC stands for direct current. Now, these are two different types of electricity, and each serves a different purpose in your RV. AC power is the kind of electricity you use in a traditional home. It flows back and forth and can carry over long distances. It typically consists of 3 wires, a ground, a neutral, and a line, which is typically the hot AC voltage. So think when plugging into shore power at a campground or running on a generator, everything that works while plugged in is essentially AC power: air conditioning, microwave, outlets, TVs, etc. DC power is the kind of electricity typically found in your car. It flows one direction and is used for low voltage systems, typically, mostly at 12 volts when we're talking about RVs. It's made up of 2 wires, a positive and a negative, typically red for positive, black for negative, but not always. So think about in your RV, your lights, your water pump, vent fans when you're off grid. It can also run your fridge, furnace, or even the water heaters, control boards. Even though these primarily run off of propane, the 12 volt DC voltage allows those items to keep things running. So for example, the propane, to keep the fridge going, it needs that control board to know what the temperature is in the fridge, to know when to turn on and off, and to know to ignite the system for your propane. Same thing with your furnace. The 12 volts, actually, your DC voltage runs the fan, of course, and also the control board, like the thermostat, and to know like what temperature it is, what temperature we're trying to get to, and to run those control volts or those control boards. Now, in newer RVs, they even have just 12 volt fridges, no propane whatsoever, and they're super efficient, whisper quiet. So just depending on what you have, those are some 12 volt DC items in your RV. Now, in your RV, you're basically living in a hybrid world. You've got both AC and DC systems running together, but not always at the same time. So where does each type of power come from? Let's start with DC power, as you have that available 24/7, 365, your battery. Versus AC, you only have when you're plugged into, some form of AC source, generator, shore power, etc. So DC. Okay, so the DC power sources in your RV. Of course, you have your house batteries, okay? If you have a travel trailer, fifth wheel, that kind of thing, we just call them your RV batteries. If you have a drivable, they're called your house batteries, versus your chassis batteries is the same thing as the truck battery for someone that's towing something. So those house batteries are 12 volts, typically. Sometimes it's 2 6 volts in series, which we're not going to get into a series because then we can talk about 24 volt, 48 volt, and all those systems, which we'll save that for a future episode. So your battery bank is what stores your DC energy. Okay, it stores that DC voltage. They themselves, like the batteries themselves, don't produce anything. They don't produce DC power. They only store it for use. Now, solar panels with a charge controller, of course, can create 12 volts, which is typically tied directly to the batteries to, number one, mainly charge your battery, charge up that battery bank system. But also, if you're producing enough voltage or enough wattage from your solar, you'll also be running your DC items directly off your solar, such as your lights, fans, etc. Now, another source of DC voltage is your vehicle's alternator. While driving, a typical 7-pin connection, if you have a towable, it's enough to have a trickle, a very slow trickle of juice back into your RV, but not really enough to charge the batteries properly. If you have a drivable RV, typically those are already installed with some form of a battery isolator or a DC to DC charger. Now, I added a DC to DC charger on my truck and Airstream, and I highly recommend it for anyone that is serious about boondocking and keeping those batteries recharged. So a DC to DC charger, it basically takes the DC voltage of your tow vehicle and properly charges your DC batteries in your RV or the house batteries if you have a drivable. So for example, if you have lithium batteries, those require a totally different charge profile than what's in your chassis batteries or your tow vehicle's regular car battery. The charge profile is completely different. So you need that DC to DC charger to appropriately charge the lithium batteries. Now, lastly, but also primarily where you get DC power from is actually AC power via your converter. Okay. So your converter not only recharges your batteries when plugged into shore power, but it also provides enough juice to run all of your DC items. So when you're plugged into AC power, technically is, so when you're plugged in, AC power technically is what's providing power to your DC items via the converter. But the second you unplug from shore power, bam, your battery takes over immediately. So just keep that in mind. Now let's talk about AC power and the different AC power sources. Primarily, this is referred to as shore power. It's just a very common phrase. RVs, it's typically 30 amp or 50 amp service, which is available at pretty much all campgrounds. Or if you have it properly installed at your house, you might have an outlet at your house that you can plug into. Now, this is not your dryer outlet. So many people ask the question, can I plug my RV into my dryer outlet? No, you cannot. Do not do that. You can rewire it to a proper outlet and you can use that. However, it is not designed for it. It is not the right plug. Most times it's not the right voltage because I'm not going to get into it right now, but do not plug into your dryer. Let's just start with that. However, you can run off your house regular standard 15 typical household outlet with what's called a dog bone adapter. Basically reduces your 50 amp input on your RV down to a 15 amp or your 30 amp down to a 15 amp. And then you can just run an extension cord. But keep in mind, when you're doing something like that, you're not really able to run large appliances like your air conditioner. If you're plugged into shore power and it's charging the batteries fully through the converter, it's already pulling probably 400 or 500 watts. And then you turn on a air conditioner that kicks up at 2,000, 3,000 watts on startup, but then runs at 1,500, 1,600 watts. You're going to be real close to popping a breaker for that exterior outlet that you're plugged into. So not really recommended, but it's good. You can top off your batteries, run minimal stuff like that. Now, next source of AC power, other than the typical shore power stuff, is an onboard generator, which also has its own power limitation. So whether that's a 2,000 watt generator, a 4,000 watt generator, or a 5,500 watt generator, or even some of the big coaches have significantly larger generators than that. No matter what you have some form of a limitation from your generator. And you just have to keep that in mind when you're using it. So if you have a 5,500 watt generator, you have to keep in mind, okay, well, two air conditioners together, that's 3,000 watts. And if I turn the microwave on at the same time, well, now we're at 4,200 watts. And now if I turn on my wife's hair dryer, boom, it's going to overload the generator and shut down. So you do have a limitation. Even if you have a very large generator, there's always some form of a limitation. So just keep that in mind when you're using it. Now, lastly, the last source you can get AC power in your RV is from an inverter. Now, we'll talk more on that in a second. But an inverter provides AC power via your DC powered batteries. It's the opposite of your converter. An inverter is the opposite of converter. Converter takes AC power and turns it into DC power. An inverter takes DC power and turns it into AC power. So basically, when you're camping without electrical hookups, you're running on DC power. Unless you fire up a generator or have a very powerful inverter to convert that DC to AC, you are running off of DC power. Now, how does AC and DC work together in your RV? Now, here's where it gets interesting. Your RV's electrical system is designed to let these two types of power work together, or at least peacefully coexist. Your converter turns AC power into DC power to charge your batteries and run 12-volt appliances when plugged into shore power, while your inverter is doing the opposite. It takes DC power and converts it to AC so you can run things like a coffee maker, microwave, TV when you're all off-grid. Now, most RVs have a fuse panel, which is DC power, and a breaker box or breaker panel, which is AC power, just like what is in your house, your breakers in your house. Now, these are two completely separate circuits, and they're managed separately, but typically in an RV, they're usually right side by each other, sometimes in the same compartment or door, access door, something like that. They're usually right side by side. But understanding this the relationship here helps you understand and troubleshoot issues and plan your energy use, especially if you're like me and you're really into boondocking or have solar setups. Now, let's talk about some real world examples here just to put it all into perspective. Example number one, you're boondocking. You're at a Cracker Barrel, you're out in the middle of the desert, no matter what it is. You have no hookups. So you want to charge your laptop. You want AC power. If you have an inverter that takes 12 volt DC power from the battery and turns it into 120 volts AC for the laptop charger. Or you can run a generator and plug it in to the AC power, and now you can charge your laptop. But if you just plug your laptop into an outlet, you don't have an inverter, you don't have generator, you're not on shore power, that laptop will never charge. That outlet is not hot. It will not do anything for you. Example number 2, you're plugged in at a campground. You're on full AC power. So the AC powers your microwave directly. The converter charges your batteries and runs your lights and vent fans at the same time, runs your air conditioning, everything. Example number 3, you're driving. Now, while you're driving, the alternator charges your RV house batteries with DC power through, like I said, a DC to DC charger or a battery isolator for those drivable RVs if you have one installed. If you don't think that just a 7-pin connection is going to actually recharge your DC voltage. It's not going to recharge your batteries hardly at all. It might be enough, like I said, to keep your lights on, something like that, but it is not much power whatsoever. So just knowing what powers what and when is the key to making your setup more efficient and keeping your batteries healthy. So a few quick tips before we wrap this up. Number 1, label your systems if you're unfamiliar and you're new to this. Starting out with labels, you can remove them down the road, but it's very simple to do. Know which outlets are AC. If you do have an inverter that only powers certain outlets, you can label certain outlets inverter. So you know when you run your inverter, at least you know that those outlets are available versus all of your outlets, depending on how it's wired up. You also might want to label lights, because while most of your ceiling lights and the typical stuff in the RV might be DC powered, if you have a lamp plugged in and you think that that's just your normal light, well, that's AC powered, so it's totally different. But label things appropriately depending on how you need them. You can label them right inside your breaker panel so you know what's off the inverter, or if you don't have one, then you just don't have one. Now, keeping in mind, don't run high power AC appliances through a small inverter, okay? It's going to drain your batteries super, super fast. Now, I have a very large inverter and a massive battery bank in my RV, so I'm capable of running both my air conditioners for a very long period of time off of my batteries because of that setup. But if you have a typical single battery or 2 battery type thing, a small little 1,000 to 2,000 watt inverter, you're going to drain your batteries super fast if you're actually pulling 1,000, 1,500, 1,600 watts. So just keep an eye on that. Now, the other thing is you want to keep an eye on your battery voltage, preferably by using a battery monitor if you can. This is a very simple item that you can install yourself. If you check out my YouTube channel, Why Not RV, and type in battery monitor, I have several videos regarding the one that I specifically use, how to install them, what they do, how they work, a couple different videos about them over the past few years. So I highly recommend one. Now, make sure your converter and inverter aren't running simultaneously in ways that would cancel each other out. So it's called a power loop. So for example, if you have an inverter which takes DC power and it's creating AC power, and then your converter is wired to the inverter, it's wired to turn on when your converter's on. Well, now it's going to take AC power and turn it back into DC power. And the efficiency loss that occurs there is called a power loop. So you're taking DC to AC, AC back to DC, but each of those items, the inverter and the converter, have an efficiency loss. So you're creating this power loop that is slowly losing power over time due to efficiency, so you're slowly draining the batteries. Now, when in doubt, especially if you're installing new gear, of course, always talk to a qualified RV technician or an electrician to make sure that you have everything installed properly. Now, if you guys have any other questions, please let me know. I'm happy to answer. But let's go ahead and wrap this up. So this has been another episode of the Why Not RV podcast. Hopefully you've got a better grip on how AC and DC power work in your RV and how they play together to keep your rig running smoothly. If you have any questions or want me to cover solar, lithium batteries, wiring in a future episode, let me know. Shoot me a message on Instagram at WhyNotRVFL or Facebook at WhyNotRV. And if you learned something today, consider leaving me a review or a comment. It just helps more people find this show. Until next time, stay powered up and keep rolling.